Hello and welcome. In this video, we're going to look at the different approaches to planning a multi-country or multi-region site with multiple languages. After completing this training, you should be able to describe considerations for designing the blueprint and live copy sites. The structure of the master site and the structure of the generated live copy sites will help determine how successful you are with your implementation. If multiple languages are not involved, creating multi-sites of the same language is pretty straightforward. This is because Multi-Site Manager does most of the heavy lifting. It gets a little more complex when you add the additional requirement of multiple languages. That is why it's important that you get the structure right before rolling out your site. The structure is the foundation for all of your sites. Getting it right at the beginning of the project is crucial to the project's success, and that all comes down to planning. The mechanics of creating multi-sites that contain multiple language is pretty straightforward. But like any type of software architecture, you need to plan for scalability and efficiency. And when planning, you need to keep these three things in mind. You need to follow some basic rules on how you structure the initial site, the blueprint and the subsequent live copies that get generated. To determine the best structure, you have to understand the business of the site. What is the main purpose of the site? What does it sell? How much of the site's content is common to the regions? Is it vastly different region to region? For example, there's a big difference between a commercial site that sells a product and a government site. Both have an international footprint, but the underlying content for both, region to region and across the languages, are vastly different. Once those two issues are addressed, you need to establish rules and protocols that make sense for the business. Let's look at some of these in more depth. When setting up your site structure, there are some rules you must follow. The first is that the website must have a single page as its root. Also, once you bring multiple languages into the mix, you need to follow a specific naming convention for the language root page. You will need to follow the ISO standard. The same goes for naming of the root country or regional page. Once you implement those simple rules, you can focus on the rest of the structure in your site. And that structure will depend on how the site's content is used based on your business. For example, here are two common structures. The one on the left in green is actually how we structure our site here at Adobe. Adobe has an international presence and the requirements for multiple languages. And we use our site to promote, support, and sell our products and services. When you look at our corporate site content and compare what we want to put out to the regions, it's pretty much the same from country to country. Now, not all services and products are available in every country. It's not an exact match. But there are no obvious regional differences. In other words, the content is pretty much the same in all regions. So we can reuse that content and focus more on the language. Our focus then becomes about reusing the language across multiple countries. The option on the right in blue is another common scenario. In this case, the context of the website is more region-specific. However, within the region, content is shared. For example, your products or your services are very different in Canada than in Europe. So while regions share a common language, English and French, the content is significantly different that basing the structure on the language would most likely result in a lot of overhead and costs when translating the content. So remember that the organizing principle of the site structure when it comes to language is the reusability of content. So once the site structure is established, you're ready to start to build out your various regional sites and languages. Generally, you will follow these steps. First, you will create a site master. This will become your blueprint. At Adobe, we use, for our master site, the English version of our US website. This is our blueprint. Next, we create a live copy from that blueprint. This becomes our master language site, the source for all our language copies. Before using that site as our language master, we make it more generic by removing any reference to the US specific items. Once that is done, we create language copies. These language copies are really masters for the source and content for our various regions. Once the languages have been translated and approved, we go back to Multi-Site Manager to roll out the copies to the regions. So that, at a high level, covers how you use the tools provided by AEM to create these multiple sites. However, a major part of your implementation strategy has to focus on establishing and agreed upon some basic rules. For example, determine who owns the content. Is it going to be controlled centrally, say corporate headquarters, or more regionally based, or a hybrid of the two? Either way, you need to determine that prior to rolling out any sites. So clearly define who is responsible for what. Use the inherent power of Adobe Experience Manager. Plan rules around blueprints, your rollout configurations. Use User Manager and the lock property of components to enforce your model. Decide if the content will be pushed or pulled. If it's centralized model, the content is pushed to the region. If it's controlled at a regional level, changes will be made and pulled. Both offer benefits and pitfalls. Centralized is easier to manage, however, it may require a lot of feedback and negotiation with the regions. If it's decentralized, the region is empowered. That is a strength, as the content is controlled by the people who know the region best. However, that means that multiple people have to be trained and a clear communication with headquarters maintained. Limit customization of components. AEM is flexible, but there is a benefit in keeping to an agreed upon standard. If you start building a lot of custom components, that will add to the translation complexity. That is not to say you cannot build custom components, but rather determine if the component needs to be customized. Remember, there's always a real benefit in reuse. So to summarize, you should now be able to describe considerations for designing the blueprint and live copies. Thanks for watching.